get these committee meetings rolling. And the first meeting is the Statewide Transportation Planning Strategic Planning Committee. We're going to hear a presentation regarding a freight plan overview by Ms. Janine Miller, our planning director, and Kelly Gwynn, our assistant office head of policy and freight planning. So, Janine, take it away.
New title? Good afternoon, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, she did.
I do have some new titles. I'm very excited, though, to be able to be as Director of Planning in front of you today and to talk about very important work that we've been doing at Office of Planning and in collaboration with other offices here at the Georgia Department of Transportation. What you're going to hear about today is specifically is going to be about the federal requirements and the federally compliant freight plan that we will be submitting to Federal Highway Administration later this month. And there are specific requirements around what dollar amounts are available to Georgia, where those projects can be funded, on which corridors, and Kelly Gwynn is going to tell you all about that. But this is a distinct set of projects. It is a small amount of money, as you'll hear. It is, I want to be very definitive about this, though, that you'll hear about today, are simply for the National Highway Freight Program. They are not at all reflective of the great work and the great projects we have throughout the state on freight projects, on freight corridors. This is just a small sliver of those projects. And then we'll talk a little bit later about the business orientation and how we pulled a lot of perspective and insight from our private partners, those who own and carry the cargo throughout the state of Georgia. We'll tell you about next steps. So I'm going to bring up Kelly Gwynn. Kelly is our new Assistant Director of Planning for Metro, Rural, Freight, and Policy. And Kelly, go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I am really honored with the new role I have here in the Division of Planning. I've been here for about 17 years now, so I've moved up through planning, and we have a great team there, so I have no worries about being able to fulfill the requirements of this new role, and I appreciate the confidence that leadership here in GDOT has in me. So as Janine mentioned, we are at the tail end of our federal freight plan update. So we've been going through this update for about 2 years now. And the federal freight plan, it's a requirement for all states to have one of these plans in place. Really, from a strategic planning perspective for transportation in the state, the freight plan is a subset of our strategic transportation plan. That plan was approved back in 2021, and that helps guide transportation investment in the state. So the freight plan itself lets us do a deeper dive into the analytics that comprise freight movement on our state's infrastructure. This plan is supportive of the goals and objectives that were identified for our strategic plan. It's also helping to support the USDOT's National Freight Strategic Plan. The focus of that plan is safety, infrastructure, and innovation. This plan has a horizon year of 2050. So what you'll see is any data projections such as volume and tonnage movement in the state are projected out to 2050. This is in alignment with a lot of our other long-range strategic planning objectives here at GDOT. It also aligns with a lot of the long-range plans for the MPOs in the state. Our freight plan, our previous one, was approved in 2018. So prior to the passage of the IIJA, the requirement was a 5-year update for this plan. So we'll be meeting that with the approval from Federal Highway coming up hopefully within the next 2 months. But in the IIJA, it was established that we need to do a freight plan update every 4 years moving forward. So because this is such a long process to do a large-scale statewide plan update such as this, we'll be starting another update within 2 to 2.5 years. Where that's a great opportunity for us is that the supply chain ecosystem is constantly evolving. So this allows us to stay current, keep up with the current trends, get current data. So what you'll see with this plan is it's really a snapshot in time. It's a little longer of a planning horizon than our STIP, but this will be updated again in 4 years. So we'll definitely have time to reflect all the great growth we're seeing in distribution centers and other industries locating here. Georgia also has always been at the forefront of freight planning. We had an award-winning freight plan that was approved in 2011, and this was way before there was a requirement in place for the states to have a freight plan. So with the passage of IIJA, there was some additional requirements added on to what needs to be included as part of the federally required freight plan. So you can see here some highlights of the requirements. When this document's posted online for yourselves and the public to look at, you'll see information about details on supply chain flows in the state. This is both by mode of transportation and by industry. So there's some really interesting maps as an example where you can see which industries are actually using what routes in the state. We've looked at the impacts of e-commerce and how that affects our freight infrastructure here in Georgia. We're starting to look at some high-level strategies and goals to help decrease freight impacts to things such as local air pollution and wildlife habitat loss. Also, a topic that everyone's always interested in is we're having an updated assessment of our commercial vehicle parking facilities here in the state. So one of the key purposes for the freight plan to be approved by the federal government is it allows the state to allocate our National Highway Freight Program funds. So these, as Janine mentioned, are federal funds that are specifically identified for use on freight projects. What I want everybody to pay attention to is this is only approximately 2% of our overall federal funding. So obviously there's a lot of funds that are being spent on other projects that are already in GDOT's program that are helping support freight. They're just not funded with the NHFP funds. Our federal freight plan has to be fiscally constrained over an 8-year time period. So from the federal perspective, that's our current fiscal year of FY23, and then looking at 24 through fiscal year 31. So we have approximately $427 million in NHFP funds that we can assign to projects that are identified in our freight plan. Another requirement in using the NHFP funds is they have to be invested on federally designated freight corridors. So for the state, that means on our primary highway freight system. This is the majority of our interstates and then some intermodal connectors throughout the state. We have approximately 1,100 miles that we can spend this on. We do have the opportunity here in Georgia to designate an additional 450 miles on what's called critical urban and critical rural freight corridors. So if we designate all of our mileage, which we do have plans to do, that would increase our eligible mileage for NHFP funding by approximately 38%. So what we're doing with the plan update right now is going through and validating what mileage do we have that's eligible, and then over the next few months we'll be working through the federal process to get this mileage designated. If the mileage is within our urban areas of the state, we'll be coordinating with our Metropolitan Planning Organization partners to designate the mileage. With this mileage being designated, really the benefit to the states is it allows us more flexibility to invest federal funds on the routes that we have strategically identified that are important and valuable to help support the freight movement that's specific to our state. I wanted to cover a little bit on some of the methodology that we've used to respond to the federal requirements for the freight plan update. First of all, I know this page has a lot going on, and this is here more for effect, but we have had a wealth of data that we've had access to throughout the course of this plan update. What I wanted to show you was the green box, the commercial data, has been a really key piece of data for us. These are all commercial data sources that are populated by the private sector, and they're also used by our private sector partners to plan for freight and logistics movement for their company. So us being able to have access to the same data sources has allowed us to evaluate our network from a business perspective. We also had a really robust freight advisory committee that was pulled together. It's a great mix of public and private sector partners, and they've been heavily involved throughout the course of this plan update. We've met 4 times up to this point, most recently in December, and each time we've gotten just great feedback from their perspective of what are they looking for from their business's needs, from the infrastructure here in the state. And we've been able to ask them interactive questions. So at our kickoff meeting, we had a survey, and we started with asking them, what are the state's strengths for business from your perspective? And I did not put these in this order. One of the first things we heard was strong DOT imports. which is an extremely encouraging way to start the meeting off. There was also talks of Georgia has a great coordination between multimodal agencies. And some of this is not so much in the under the purview of GDOT, but it's part of the ecosystem that we're looking at for freight and logistics movement in the state. Things like the location of Georgia in the southeast and warehouse space. But we've then switched over and asked them, okay, where are the opportunities that we can leverage to invest in the infrastructure to help improve your business? We heard things such as designated truck-only lanes, which obviously there's a project that we are planning along 75 for those. Overpasses, this was in the context of grade separations for at-grade rail crossings. They want to see bottlenecks reduced, which I think we all want to see that. So some of these weren't a surprise, but it's great information to hear reinforced and hear specific to Georgia what our business partners are looking for. And then lastly, it was a general consensus at the first meeting that they are really, they have a lot of confidence in where the department is already investing. So any of the initiatives that we currently have in place or any pilot projects and just what we already have in the pipeline for projects are already supportive of freight movement. So I'm going to turn it over to Janine, but I'll be around afterwards and answer questions. Janine's going to talk through some of the results of the analysis that we had over the last 2 years.
Thank you, Kelly, for that presentation. Very helpful information. She and Matt Markham and team have been instrumental in making this work a success so far, and I think you'll be interested to hear and see what some of these findings were. So we wanted to take a close look at the types of industries that are moving freight on Georgia's roadways. And those data sets that Kelly spoke of, those few dozen worth of data sources, private sector included, enabled us to have a line of sight that we've never had before into the types of roadways and location of roadways that our different key industries rely on throughout the state. If you just look at the map of the state routes in sort of a black and white, it looks like we have a lot of trucks driving all over our roadways all over the state, and that is absolutely true. But with these unique and new data sources, we disaggregate and see how important both Metro Atlanta and our interstates are for all of the key industries, but that food and agriculture and distribution rely very heavily in manufacturing on the northwest corner. And then when you get into South Georgia, you can see Southwest is really reliant on the agriculture industry in Southwest Georgia, and Southeast is really reliant on our roadways. And manufacturing on the east and central east carry a lot of trucks on our state routes there. But in the year 2050, and that is our long-range planning horizon, our data indicates that we're nearly going to double the tons of freight moved on our roads, and the value of that freight is going to more than double to $1.6 trillion moved on our Georgia roadways every year. We also heard from our private sector stakeholders on the advisory committee that there are 5 key performance indicators that help them understand the success of their business, access to their customers and suppliers. And these metrics also can be translated from the business frame into infrastructure decision-making, which we have been able to do through the course of this plan. Reliability, of course, being able to deliver on as promised. We can measure that. An infrastructure metric is related to the 95th percentile of travel times and average travel times, and we can model that. Speed is very important, and speed by way of velocity, less so speeding over the limit, but more just getting to destinations at a steady speed. And we are able to absolutely easily measure that with our models. Cost is always a driver in business decision-making, especially related to freight movement. And in infrastructure terms, our metric is around total delay, cost per vehicle mile traveled. Risk, of course, is important to ensure that when there might be outages or disruptions throughout their regular supply chain, that risk can be mitigated with other modes and other routes. And so we're able to measure that as well through our modeling. And safety, of course, is important for all of us, and businesses included. And the cost of crashes per vehicle mile traveled is how we measure that for our infrastructure, transportation infrastructure purposes. But it's really so important to businesses as they are looking to reduce losses to their workforce, operations, and their brand. So we were able to translate all of that data and analysis into, as Kelly mentioned, ways we can invest that National Highway Freight Program funds. About $45 million a year in total over the 8-year period, as the federal government is requiring us to fiscally constrain and budget that specific freight program. Is about $427 million over the course of the 8 years. But an example of projects that we'll be doing once we hopefully receive approval from the federal government for our plan include certain phases on some key projects that you all know about, that we have, Georgia DOT staff have talked about and presented to you previously. The interchanges on I-20 and 285 on both the east and west side, and the right-of-way, beginning to fund some of the right-of-way required for the commercial vehicle lanes between Macon and Atlanta. Again, these dollars are not going to fund all of these projects. It just contributes to making sure we can get them done. In the future, going forward, we're going to have I-95 ITS, that's Intelligent Transportation System broadband, built out on I-95, and the freight funding can contribute to that. And there's other projects throughout the state in various phases, including in the Savannah area, Bibb County, Lowndes County. But one thing that's really important for the whole state and for all carriers and shippers themselves is the ability for trucks to park when they have to take their rest breaks, either during the day or overnight. So GDOT is doing our part. Well, I'll make a note that only 6% of truck parking in Georgia is provided by public spaces by GDOT. 94% is provided by the private sector. So we are doing our part to improve and advance parking opportunities throughout the state. We're taking a scoping analysis of about 24 truck parking facilities that we own around the state. And we're even looking at way stations. Georgia is one of the states that enables trucks to park at the way stations overnight. And it becomes a great opportunity when those truck drivers need the rest. So that we are preserving the option for in the future when we're able to bring those projects into the design and construction phase, that we'll be able to fund truck parking. Lastly, next steps, we're going to submit the federally compliant freight plan and work with Federal Highways to respond to any questions they may have and satisfy the federal requirements. We're going to work through the federal process that Kelly mentioned to expand our federally designated critical rural and urban freight corridors. Again, those are the ones that Georgia can designate on top of the ones that the federal government has designated. And making sure we have as many opportunities throughout the state to invest these dollars and have the flexibility we'll need in the coming years. We're going to do additional work to understand what our additional freight investments are going to be required to meet these business KPIs. Our current project pipeline likely has projects in it already that do support the performance of our roadways for trucks. And then potentially where we can warrant any redirect of existing funding, and we're also going to apply for federal grants as applicable to certain project types that are eligible from USDOT. And then we'll continue our business analysis along the foundational, catalytic, and innovation, and continue our work in being a good business partner, as Kelly mentioned, to our shippers and carriers throughout the state. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Janine and Kelly. Any questions, Mr. Boswell?
Kelly, you mentioned matching. You mentioned Kelly. Okay. I'm sorry. Are these matching funds, or will this all be coming from federal?
The $45 million a year is unmatched, so that is the federal dollar, and then we have to match 20% state funds to ensure we can spend those funds according to federal rules.
Are we looking to build additional roads, or are we looking to improve the ones that we have for these freight corridors and so forth? Or both?
A little bit of both. A little bit of both. And again, what we have right now for our project list is simply for that $45 million in federal funds. We are doing additional analysis to do that deeper dive. As you may know, we have GRIP corridors throughout the state, and those have been absolutely critical for moving trucks throughout the state, within, to, from rural areas where manufacturing and agribusiness is blooming. And so those are going to be a key investment category, GRIP corridors and our interstates. There's simply no other facility, there's no other roadway that performs for moving trucks reliably, safely, low cost than our interstate highways. So interchanges, improvements to interchanges, new capacity on our interstates throughout are other projects that will be coming forward in future years.
Any other questions? No? Janine, Kelly, thank you all for your presentation. We enjoyed that.
Appreciate it.
Forward to more. If there's no further business, this committee will stand adjourned.
Mr. Brown, are you ready for me to bedazzle you a number?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Chairman, members of the board, I'm here today to present the amended 23 and 24 budget. We'll start off here on, hold on, I'm getting ahead of myself here. We're starting here on the amended FY23 revenue comparison. Included on this first line in excise, there was an additional $89 million in excise being added into the budget. I will mention that there was a fund source swap between motor fuel funds and other funds coming into the budget of 1.105. That netted out with the fund source swap to make motor fuel whole. And then there was an additional $89 million in excess brought in. The Transportation Trust Fund, as y'all know, consists of the hotel motel, the alternative fuel vehicle fee, and the heavy vehicle fee. That's included in the Transportation Trust Fund, and there is no adjustment in the amended for that. You'll see Greta. They are moving Greta into the DOT's budget up underneath payments to CERTA, so you're going to see them being per se in the future being administratively attached to us. And then in the Transit Trust Fund, there was no change in the Transit Trust Fund or in state general funds in the amended. So you can see that there was an additional $89.4 million being brought in to the amended budget. Here's my pie chart. I mean, not my pie chart, my bar graph. I got Russell's pie chart on my mind from this morning. Here's the bar chart that y'all see me present during the session. As you can see, the capital projects, which consist of capital construction, capital maintenance, and local roads admin, that is almost 50% of our overall budget, okay? Routine maintenance is the next biggest ticket item at 20. So between the capital program and routine maintenance, that makes up roughly 70% of the amended 23 budget. General operations is also included in there. As you can see, it's roughly 11% overall. And that is like the administrative piece, program delivery, data collections, planning, and traffic management. Of course, we have our matching funds, 10% of excise, and you can see that here in the budget at 209. Also, we have in here, I've talked about routine maintenance payments to CERTA, which consist of 49.6. And payments to CERTA, that is, consists of mostly the debt service. It consists of the Georgia Transportation Infrastructure Bank. And then finally, now it consists of temporarily right now, Greta coming into the budget. You can see the GEO bond debt service makes up roughly 5%. And then lastly, there is payments to the ATL at 13. Mm-hmm. All right, moving into the amended budget. Here you can see the GEO bond debt service. What they've done here is they have done a fund source swap between Transportation Trust funds and motor fuel funds, and they've redistributed those Transportation Trust funds coming out of the GEO bond debt service. You'll see it coming into capital construction down there. Also, in the GEO bond debt service, you see it's not a one-for-one swap of the $90 million, and what that is an increase in the variable rate debt on our bonds. In capital construction, with the $75.4 million increase coming into it, that consists of, like I said, the fund source swap and the reduction in motor fuel, so it could be redistributed to LMIG, payments to CERTA, and to make up for that difference in the GO bond debt that you see at the top. What this does, it helps us in the capital construction program administer with those cost increases that you see. Like if you were watching online today at the joint appropriations here, and you would have heard the commissioner talk today about, you know, the increase in cost of commodities and doing business now. LMIG, the 8.9 is the 10% match that I mentioned. And then payments to CERTA, what that is $351,000 coming into their budget, which consists of Greta being brought into their budget. All right, that is the 23 budget. Any questions on 23 before I move into 24? Okay, moving into 24, you'll see the overall change to the budget is $177 million. Based on the current revenue estimate that we've received from the state economist and excise, they have it at $123,790. What you see in the Transportation Trust Fund and in the Transit Trust Fund for rideshare, those adjustments are based off of them truing up based off FY22 collections. So they brought forward, they'll have a 2-year look back and they bring it forward to 24. What this is making those adjustments in the budget. Okay, and then finally, there is a reduction in state general funds of $919,000, and that's going to be, you'll see that coming up in a few slides in rail imports. I will touch quickly over this because y'all saw that, if you've seen the same setup on the bar chart a few seconds ago, but we're at 50%, like I said, for capital projects and then the routine maintenance budgets. You can see there's not a lot of discrepancy between general operations, the 10% in LMIG, and then in intermodal and some of the other smaller ones like GO bond debt, Sermas, and, you know, payments to the ATO. Okay, so here we get into the meats and potatoes of everything. What you see here is you'll see how we have the fund sources that are set up for each of the programs, because we have Transportation Trust Fund fees that are now being brought into our capital programs. So you'll see them at the top. We'll start at the top with the GO bond debt service, like the fund source swap that happened in 23. That's same scenario in 24. There's a slight increase in GO bond debt service and motor fuel for the $87 million. You'll see that being captured and funded through the reductions in capital construction below. And what that is to adjust for the debt service. Also in capital construction, you'll see an increase of $114.6 million going into that program. And then let me highlight on capital maintenance, you'll see an additional 8.7. So between capital constructions adds, capital maintenance adds, what we're doing there is leveraging those additional dollars to help offset the cost increases that we're seeing in fuel, commodities. That's really what that's there for, is to help offset with that. In program delivery, you'll see an increase here, and I want to thank the governor for this. And so if we have employees out there listening, the governor has appropriated in this budget a $2,000 increase for state employees for this year. So what you'll see in program delivery, that $2.7 million, consists primarily of the $2,000 that is within that program being added. And then we actually have a slight reduction in our insurance premiums that are statewide adjustments, is what I per se call those. On this next slide, you'll see in data collections, planning, and traffic management. All of the adds here are just reflecting the $2,000 pay increase for state employees and those statewide adjustments for merit system, you know, insurance cleanup, that sort of thing. In departmental admin, though, you'll see an increase of $4.9 million, which is an increase that we have for operational needs, the statewide changes, and salary adjustments. LMIG is just the truing up of the 10% of excise for 24, which is that almost $12 million add. And then in routine maintenance, that additional $25 million, that's the add there. There's 19.5 that helps within the program for the increased fuel cost and material for contracting cost in routine maintenance. And then it has the pay raise and the statewide adjustments buried in that. And then I've talked about traffic management. On the next slide is the intermodal slide, which consists of airport aid, ports, rail, and transit. In state general funds for the airport aid program, there's no adjustment in the state general funds for airport aid. In ports and waterways, there is the statewide changes to reflect the increase for the $2,000 pay raise and for the statewide adjustments for insurance, teamwork billing, that sort of thing. In the rail program, you'll see an $8 million reduction. What this was, y'all probably recall from last session where there was an ad for Class 2 standards, for Class 2 standard upgrades. What they've done is they've taken the $8 million out of the base for 24. The new line item here you'll see is locomotive diesel funds. What this is was a sales tax on locomotive fuel that is to be dedicated to the rail program for Class 1 projects. You'll see that being added into the budget and into this budget. And so the net effect of all of that is a reduction of $926,000 between statewide changes, increases, the $8 million coming out. Those are the adjustments. But it does establish that locomotive diesel tax, sales tax fund, which is the same concept with the look back from a couple of years ago. In the transit program here, you'll see the Transportation Trust Fund fees, and you'll see the Transit Trust Fund. In the Transportation Trust Fund, that additional $5 million consists of the transit match for the program, as well as to administer all of the FTA funds that we have. And then in the Transit Trust Fund, those are dedicated for transit projects throughout the state. So the additional 7.6 will be added for the total of the 23.5. Moving into the next slide is in payments to CERTA. What you see here is a reduction of $4 million. That is a combination of a reduction in their guaranteed revenue bond payments, the reduction in the debt service coming down for guaranteed revenue bonds, as well as Greta being brought into the payments to CERTA budget. And then finally, in payments to the ATL, the $66,000 is the statewide changes for the salary increases for state employees and the like merit system adjustments, the statewide changes. And that is the 24. Any questions for 24?
Let me ask this question.
Yeah.
Do you think will the $2,000 per year increase, with that assist us in maintaining some employees that we lose, I noticed, every month?
We have, the commissioner and the leadership here, we have tried to make big strides in recruitment and retention. We're currently working on a recruitment and retention plan right now that we're trying to get finalized. I think it will, because, you know, previously when you would put into a budget request, they would put percentages, okay? The governor last session put in a $5,000 increase, which went a long way during these times of inflation. The additional $2,000 is definitely an add. When you start looking at it, it really puts everybody on a level playing field, because somebody who was making $50,000 a year in previous lives would get 2% of that, may only be $1,000, where now they're getting $5,000 and $2,000. It will go a long way. But like we say, with the way the economy currently is and inflation, but the employees are appreciative of all of this and everything, and it does make a big impact for them.
Okay.
So, yes.
All right.
I have a question, Mr. Chair. Angela, if you, could you go back to the intermodal slide? Two questions there. On the locomotive diesel funds, is that a new collection?
It is. What happened was, a couple of years ago, the legislature put into legislation, and y'all help me clear this up, Commissioner, if I say this wrong, where the diesel sales tax collected would be dedicated toward Class 1 railroad projects.
Okay.
And that's what that is reflective of. This is the first year you've seen this.
So it wasn't collected before that act and
Based off
current to this time?
FY '22 collections, because they do a 2-year look back,
Mhm.
based off what was implemented 2 years ago, this is the first year you see that reflected in our budget. Same thing like on the Transportation Trust Fund and the Transit Trust Funds they created, they do an adjustment because they do a look back from 22 to bring it forward to 24. Am I saying that correctly? Somewhat, maybe?
Well, I guess.
Trying to help a friend behind you, but, yeah.
But this is the
It
first
was
year.
It was collected previously, but they actually dedicated, and they used the same language that they did in House Bill 170, which is appropriated to that purpose. If it's not appropriated to that purpose, it's repealed after 2 years. So it was collected before, but it just went in the general fund.
Oh, it did,
Yeah.
general fund, that answers that, yeah.
But this is the first year you see it actually reflected in the budget.
Okay.
There's some statutory language too that requires how those dollars can be disseminated. We have 2 Class 1 operators. The statutory language is a little veiled about surface transportation, things that are regulated under Surface Transportation Board, which is basically the Class 1s. And it's a little bit of a formula required based on the operational miles of those railroads. So there's a percentage allocation that can go to them for projects of public interest. So I think the story here though too to understand is those dollars can't be used on the state-owned short lines. So this is to the Class 1s basically.
Okay.
Which obviously the reduction of the 8 million previously was going to rehabilitation and projects along the Class 3 railroads, the state-owned short line railroads. So something else to work forward on to try to make sure we continue to make adequate investment in our short lines as well as the Class 1s.
Okay. My other question, if I may, deals with airport aid. I notice there's no change in that. Is there an explanation as to why there's no change in that?
Currently, right now, currently that is outsourced. I think they're actively trying to fill positions, but currently right now in airport aid, there is currently no position. It's all contracted, so there wouldn't be a $2,000 adjustment for the $2,000 pay raise, or it wouldn't be an adjustment for any of the statewide adjustments, because currently right now there's no employees, full-time DOT employees in airport aid.
Oh, okay, but I mean, but not all that money is salaries though. I mean, some of it is strictly airport aid, and I guess that's where I'm going.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
In the airport aid program, when you said there was no change, currently right now, that $26 million gives us the ability to match close to $47 million in FAA funds. Okay? And there's clearly a list of statewide projects that are way greater than what is consisted here on the airport aid list. And I'll be glad to share that with you.
Yeah.
If you would like. I can show you the airport aid list.
Yeah, that'd be helpful, because I would like to get a better understanding of how much request is out there versus how much we're actually able to support.
Over 50 million requested for FY '24 from the airport authorities. So basically the story is it stayed the same. They kept the budget flat with state funds, and all of that is for airport aid.
That answers that. Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You have to adjourn it.
All right, can we adjourn this, committee meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Give us a legislative update. Josh, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and full board, Commissioner. That season again, back into session. So we'll kick it off first with the legislative calendar. One thing that, as far as everyone can tell, is unprecedented. They set the full calendar at the start of the session. So we now know when they're going to adjourn on the 29th. Will be sine die. March the 29th is sine die. March the 6th is crossover day. You see those two dates highlighted in yellow, that the significance. Again, a crossover day, that's that last day that legislation has to pass at least one chamber for that legislative bill to survive and eventually potentially be sent to the governor and signed into law. I realized I made a slight error on this. I X'd out too many days. I took us in the middle of next week, so let's imagine some of those X's gone. So we're at the 18th. So this is, again, budget week, and you heard the presentation from the Treasurer. Commissioner presented today the Joint Committee on Appropriations. So that was sort of the core of this week, as they're going through the governor's budget. Last week, some of the key highlights were obviously the opening of session. There was a football game, I think. So I think everyone is familiar with that. And then they had exit issues, but they didn't have State of the State. State of the State's going to be next week. The governor released his budget, though. Usually, State of the State and budget release are contemporaneous, but the governor released it on Friday of last week, so that they were able to jump into budget. We anticipate, I don't know if Angela mentioned, there should be a subcommittee meeting tomorrow on that amended budget. A week from tomorrow, we expect our first meeting of the House Transportation Committee. Chairman Jaspers is going to call that for the organizing of the committee, but he also anticipates trying to take up our legislation, our housekeeping bill, and make that one of the first orders of business to go ahead and get that done and out of the committee. So moving on beyond the calendar, as you can see, pretty much if you write a summary, they're in pretty much Monday through Thursday every day, out not in legislative session Friday. So hopefully this should be of great assistance to you as you think about any trips you might make to the Capitol, any of your delegations that are coming to town, anyone who might want to come to town. You have a pretty good sense of what days they're going to be there. So this is really great, and I think everyone's really glad to be able to know what the next 3 months look like, or 2.5 months. So next, just going to highlight the House Transportation Leadership. So that's the committee leadership and the subcommittee on appropriations for transportation leadership. You got Chairman Rick Jaspers, but is continuing as the chairman. The new vice chair is Representative Lisa Hagan, is the vice chair of the Transportation Committee. Appropriations Subcommittee, the chairmanship has stayed the same. Representative Clay Perkle is still chairman, but now Representative Vance Smith is vice chairman. Formerly Representative Rick Williams, who's now in the Senate, was the vice chair on the Appropriations Subcommittee. On the Senate side, we have we're still kind of waiting the full membership of House Transportation. On the Senate side, we know Senator Greg Dolezal is the chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee. He is also the chairman of the equivalent Appropriations Subcommittee in the Senate. So he'll have both gavels for the full committee authorizing of transportation and the Appropriations Subcommittee. And so you can see the membership there. New to the committee are Senator Colton Moore, Jason Anavitarde, Senator Derek Mallow, Senator Josh McLaurin, and Senator Sean Steele. So all the other ones have either served on the committee or ex officio, and for Senate purposes, even if you're an ex officio member, you're a voting member. So when we think about the legislative outlook, obviously our GDOT legislative items, which the board approved that we talked about last month, looking at quick response contracting and improving the cap on that so that it reflects inflation and other things, we'll certainly, that'll be our top goal, make sure we get that legislation moved through the session. We also anticipate that there will be electric vehicle legislation. I think either it's been circulated or will be circulated to you, that PDF of the final report. We were going to send you the link, but right now the full report, which included all the presentations, it's crashing the website. So you should have a PDF of the final report along with the recommendations. So we're anticipating sort of a little bit of news that it's really, that legislation is likely to focus on kind of what's considered the consensus items about charging, being allowed to charge by kilowatt hour, and some of the other permitting stuff. The pieces about like kind of the market regulation, what can the power companies charge the convenience stores, et cetera. That stuff, there was a Georgia Power rate case before the PSC that has been finalized. There's a sense that a lot of those contentious items were kind of resolved in that. So that may be the focus of the legislation, should be on the more consensus items, but we'll continue to monitor and keep the board updated. Freight and logistics infrastructure, obviously you just had the presentation. Freight and logistics has been consistently in the forefront of the minds of the members of the General Assembly for the last 3 years. Have no reason to not suspect that it won't also be this year, and so we look to stay engaged with them They look at the freight logistics report, they look at the freight funding study that they commissioned that was performed by Moffitt Nickel. And so we'll see where that may lead. I don't have a bullet here, but we're also anticipating the issue of truck weights to pop up again. It came up last session, nothing was taken, but we anticipate there'll be a renewed push to increase truck weights, and certainly we'll continue to do our due diligence to provide the information, share concerns, show what that impact is, so they can the General Assembly can make the policy decision, and everybody, including industry that's advocating, can understand the full scope of that impact if you were to change the law. So with that, I'll transition to the federal update. At December the 29th, President Biden signed.
Hold on
Sorry.
just a second, we got a
I'll ask a
question.
question. On the electric, vehicle legislation, I mean, how does that gonna affect our budget?
What they're looking to do probably will not have a major impact. The one thing they are talking about is around these third-party charges, these commercial chargers, ensuring that the motor fuel tax is applied to them. So
Okay,
immediate term, not much. Long term, it does. I think the goal would be to ensure consistency in preserving the user fees generated for transportation.
okay,
Agnostic of what's powering that engine,
okay,
they'll want to make sure it's consistent. So I do think they have that in mind as well.
okay.
But no, I wouldn't expect anything that overnight changes what our budget looks like right now.
Okay, all right,
From
thank you.
that.
Anyone else with a question in regards to our state legislation? Josh?
So again, federal update, first thing I'll note is on December 29th, the President signed in the federal FY23 omnibus appropriations. And so what that does is because we have the FAST Act, IIJA/bill that is now our authorizing legislation, the appropriators have to each year come in and fund that at that level, which they did in the omnibus. So they funded it at the IIJA bill levels. They did provide additional funds, but those additional funds won't come to us as a formula distribution. They will come to states in the form of earmarks. So, and I'll be able to provide you shortly with a list of the earmarks that were received for Georgia. There's kind of two categories of them. There were earmarks under the transportation portion of the appropriation. Then that will be, depending on which federal agency, whether it's U.S., whether it's Federal Highways or FTA or FAA, will flow down, and then in some cases they're going to flow through us. Other cases they'll flow to a local. There's also HUD earmarks for transportation projects. Those won't, those will flow through HUD like other community development administered from HUD to the local governments. But there are some transportation projects that could be of interest to members of the board, and obviously to us as a department, but they'll be administered differently. I want to make sure you have those, but just understand that distinction. Those HUD earmarks will flow through HUD to the direct recipient, the local government. Next, just want to highlight, this is kind of the last slide here, in terms of new committee assignments up in Congress. Newly elected Congressman Mike Collins is going to be on transportation infrastructure, and I will assume we haven't seen the list of the Democratic Party members, but we'd anticipate we'll still have some members on that side on TNI, but he'll be on TNI, and then Congressman Andrew Clyde will be on appropriations. So obviously those omnibuses and whatever buses they got usually go through appropriations. So we have another Georgian on that committee. And with that, that wraps it up. Barring any questions.
Any questions? Yes, please.
Just quick, Josh, I stepped out. Is there anything significant in this legislative session around transportation? Anything we're anticipating?
So I'll just go back. Obviously, the EV stuff will be of consequence.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think there's a good opportunity and a lot of conversation about freight and logistics. As always, the budget's going to be the big thing. I think the budget's going to continue to be, as we work with members of the General Assembly.
Even with the surplus? Even the fact that we have a surplus?
Well, certainly, as they consider different policy avenues and ways they decide it's best to augment and augment investment in transportation, what options are available to them. But certainly, we will be there to provide them whatever information they need.
Any additional comments? We're hearing none. The meeting stands adjourned.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'd like to call to order the Office of Administrative Delivery. And our presenter is already in place.
Try to get the mic ready.
Yes,
Good.
sir.
Thank you. There we go. Good afternoon, members of the board and commissioner. My name is Andrew Hainig. I'm the construction program manager for the Office of Alternative Delivery. I'm really excited today to talk to you about the department's, hopefully the department's first CMGC project, which we're recommending to be the US 17 State Route 404 Bridge maintenance project. And I'll talk about what CMGC is, so to refresh your course a little bit on what it is and why we're choosing this project, and then a short slide on the schedule we anticipate using for this project. So I've been in front of the board a couple of times recently talking about alternative contracting methods and what that is, what those are. We did get legislation approved back in 2021 to allow for the use of alternative contracting methods. And there's really three methods covered in that legislation, but really I'm going to focus today on CMGC because it's just one of the delivery mechanisms within that legislation. So I mentioned the legislation was approved. So what have we been doing since that time frame, since it was approved? Well, it was before the board in December of 21 for presenting what the rules stipulate. And then in January 2022, this board did approve our rules for the use of ACM. I'll talk a little bit in this presentation about some stipulation in those rules. And then really throughout 2022, we've been doing some industry feedback on CMGC and on alternative contracting methods to really get feedback from the industry on our process and when we're going to use CMGC and what their feedback is. So we've reached out to Georgia Highway Contractors through GHCA, and then we've also reached out to the consultant community via the ACEC subcommittee committee. So kind of throughout 2022, we've been getting feedback on CMGC, and then I'm happy to announce that the manual was published back in October of 2022. So now that we have the procedures in place and the industry is kind of aware of the process and what it all means, we're here today again talking about the first project that we have for recommendation. Including within the rules are stipulations on its use. We don't anticipate using ACM too often. It's fairly restrictive on its use, but it is, in the right context, a good tool to deliver certain types of projects. And then also, most important for today, one of the rules stipulates that board approval is required for use of any ACM method, including CMGC, prior to project solicitations. So again, what is CMGC? It's an acronym I've thrown around a lot already. The acronym stands for Construction Management and General Contractor. Really, it's just a new delivery mechanism that we're going to use in alternative delivery. And what it is you have three major components. You have the owner, in this case, Georgia DOT, of course. You have the designer of record, or the consultant, and then you have the contractor. The main difference with CMGC is that you have the contractor on board during design, during the pre-construction phase, during the concept and environmental, and going through the design phase, design documents. So the contractor is really able to get involved with the design, do design reviews, help with constructability, help answer questions on the design. So it's really, you see the benefits a lot on CMGC, getting that contractor in board up front to work with the designer on the best solution for the project. So I touched on kind of the three major components, the consultant, the owner, and the contractor. You also have an independent cost estimator that plays a less significant but major role. They develop a cost estimate based on the final design. And what happens is the independent cost estimator develops that cost estimate, and that becomes the comparison for the contractor's bid. Really, the bid is, in this case, called a negotiated construction price. But you compare the negotiated construction price with that independent cost estimate, and hopefully they align. There's a little bit of a negotiation if needed. But 9 times out of 10, or even more than that, across the country, the independent cost estimate and the contractor's bid or the bid package align. And so in that case, then the construction manager becomes the general contractor. That's sort of the intent throughout the nation. Again, most of the times you end up with the construction manager being the general contractor. That's sort of the intent and the way you want it to work. So I touched on there's really three major entities. There's 2 separate contracts between the designer and the CMGC firm, so it is a lot different in between that and design build in this case. So that means since you have 2 contracts, you also have 2 separate procurements. So we're going to start here with a procurement for the consultant through our Transportation Services office, through Treasurer Young's office. And then we're also at the same time going to start a procurement with the contractor. And that'll be done through our office, through alternative delivery. And that'll really follow the design build process. There you can see follows the design build best value procurement, and I'll talk about a little bit about what that entails. So really CMGC is a really great approach for involving the contractor up front. Again, answering those design questions, being involved up front as much as possible when used in the right circumstance. And we believe that we definitely have the right project for that purpose.
Yes, I'm sorry.
How do you go about selecting the
It's sort of similar to the consultant. We do anticipate overlapping that with the consultant procurement, but it is a totally separate procurement. You look at, through all of our procurements, we look at similar projects that they have history with and have they served in that estimator role before, and really getting the best firm that has the most experience, applicable experience in the past.
Are we using this now? We already started the...
No, this would be the first project using this method.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep.
Do you anticipate costs coming down? Obviously, that's the goal, obviously.
Yeah.
I have a slide a little bit later talking about how across the nation, they really do CMGC reduces the post-let change orders, post-let surprises, if you will, because you have such a coordination up front. And then you are able to negotiate the terms on the contract. So I would say, yes, that is the goal. So with any ACM, alternative contracting method, whether it's design build or CMGC, we do look at suitability for the project and feasibility. You know, we really want to pick the right project for the delivery method. So what projects make good CMGC projects? I'll touch on the second one first. It's really projects that present unique needs that would benefit from contractor involvement early in the design process. It's really the number one benefit for CMGC. You're able to bring in the contractor on. You know, if you have complex constructability questions, how are they going to stage the project? What are their means and methods? What materials are they going to use if they're innovative materials? Those are great questions to be able to ask from the designer to the contractor and really you can tailor the design to the contractor in this case. So that's a really good benefit. Phased project delivery or issuance of multiple work packages. We do see that in design build as well, where maybe the contractor wants to go after certain work packages and complete that work first, and you get some schedule efficiencies that way. In CMGC, though, you get another added benefit where you can have the contractor on board, and they might have a long lead time on a certain item. They might have to procure an item a little bit up front, and so the contractor is able to get out in front of those long lead times, and then you can get some schedule efficiencies that way. Some other good examples are innovation and design complexities. Certainly it makes sense where if it's a project that maybe the designer is not as familiar with, there are innovative approaches, there's complex design issues, they're able to ask the contractor, you know, what have they seen in the field, and what lessons learned do they have to help the designer get right. Risk identification, and allegation, and mitigation. On alternative contracting method projects, we always do risk matrices. And we always have the consultant develop a risk matrix and, you know, come up with appropriate risk mitigation strategies. How are you going to address certain risk elements? But in this project, not just do you have the consultant doing the risk matrix, but you also have the contractor. The contractor has a lot of lessons learned from doing similar projects, you know, their experience, their lessons learned that they can bring. Maybe they've seen this risk pop up on other projects and they can know how to handle those risks. And then cost control and schedule complexity, this really goes to the point I was making about across the nation, they do really see some, a reduction, I won't say an elimination, but a reduction in post-let change orders and cost overruns. Because you are involved in the contractor, you're tailoring the design to the contractor's means and methods. So I've talked a lot about CMGC in general, but now moving forward with the project in particular. The project is the US 17 State Route 404 Spur Bridge Maintenance Project. And this is the main bridge in downtown Savannah over the Savannah River. Y'all probably know it's been around a while. It was open to traffic in 1991. So open to traffic in 91, really constructed in the late 80s. And of course, that means designed in the mid 80s. So it's basically 40 years almost since it was designed or since the design started. And there's been a lot of upgrades in cable technology since that time. And you also have 40 years of wear and tear, degradation on the cables. You have the saltwater environment down there in Savannah. So we're recommending replacing the existing cables under live traffic. That is a project that's been done across the nation where they do replace these cables. Again, you see a wear and tear of the cables over time, especially in a saltwater environment like this. So that is a project that's sort of been done across the nation in a few instances. Also, we're recommending doing some bridge maintenance on the bearings, the joints, and the barriers as part of the project. So it's really a maintenance project, but it's obviously a major maintenance project. And last but not least, we're seeking to increase the vertical clearance under the bridge within the shipping channel as part of the cable replacement. Obviously, this is a major thoroughfare for GPA, and getting that air draft increase will really help their operations. So I touched on cables have been replaced on other bridges throughout the nation, and obviously we have raised bridges before. We jack bridges fairly often, but I think combining those two is really a unique approach across the nation that we're really excited to get to work on in Georgia. I'll touch on one other element that makes this project really, really good for CMGC delivery is you're going to be able to have the contractor, but then also the cable supplier, the cable manufacturer, and the cable installer working with the designer. So answering questions like what strands do you use, what size strands, how many, and then, come up with the best strategy on the saltwater environment and protecting those cables over time. So hopefully then you're able to get a long life expectancy on the cables going forward. So also in the rules, not just to stipulate ACM approval, but there's a mention on following P3 procurement strategies if this project does require financing, or following the design build procurement methodology if it does not require funding. And right now we're able to deliver the project via the department's regular program without private financing, so that's great. So we're recommending the use of the design build methodology. What that means is really a two-phase process where we do a request for qualifications out to the industry. They respond with their SOQs or statements of qualifications. And this is really important because, again, you're getting the most highly qualified contractor on board, the ones that have done this similar type work, the ones that have the lessons learned. And you really, we're able to shortlist also, so getting the 3 to 5 most highly qualified teams with their experiences on board to answer some of the questions. Once we get the SOQs and we shortlist, then we would issue an RFP for really covering design oversight from the contractor's perspective. And then since it is a best value procurement, that really just means it's not awarded exclusively on low bid. There's other factors to consider in how we award and how we pick the awardee. So those certain things would be qualifications, again, not just the firm, but also so the individuals, the project management team that's going to be working on the project, what kind of experience do they have. And then technical proposal, that's really sort of what risk do they see already, how have they worked with a designer in the past, what do they see as maybe some of the design issues. All of those things are going to be part of the package that we evaluate. And then also part of the evaluation package will be the pre-construction services fee. It's a little bit different role that the contractor is serving, right? They're working in the pre-construction services portion of the project. So there's certain things like attending meetings, doing constructability reviews, doing design reviews, doing schedule development. And so we're going to pay the contractor for those services, which they don't typically do except for in this model. So part of our evaluation criteria will include a pre-construction services fee that they'll submit to us. Now, really, this is the last slide talking about schedule, about where we're going to go forward from here. So we did present this project to the Savannah NPO in July of last year, and then they approved it in December of last year. So that's really the time frame to get us to January. Board committee approval hopefully today, and then full board approval tomorrow. Going forward from today, then we have a public notice of advertisement that would take place in February, followed by industry forum and one-on-ones. I mentioned this really follows the design build procurement process. We do industry forums and one-on-ones on design build projects where we go out to the industry. They're able to ask questions about the procurement, and we're able to provide feedback in a private, confidential format. So it's a really good opportunity. Also mentioned those one-on-one meetings are for the consultants and the contracting industry, since they're 2 separate procurements and 2 separate contracts. We anticipate firms going after one or the other, of course. So we anticipate kicking off the consultant and the contractor procurements both February and March. Going forward in that schedule, that's really following the contract schedule. So we would anticipate advertising an RFQ in April, them responding in June with their SOQs, and then advertising a request for proposals in August. Proposals would be due back in November, and then a notice to proceed for pre-construction services, hopefully the latter part of this year. And just to be clear, that would be bringing the contractor on board. Most of the time you bring a contractor on board, that means you're going to construction pretty shortly. But this is just bringing a contractor on board to begin that coordination with the designer. So you see December 23 would have a contractor on board, but then there's a lot of coordination going forward after that date. So don't expect construction to start in January of 24, but it'll begin the process. So that's really, in a nutshell, what CMGC is and why this project is a great candidate for it. I think today I need committee recommendation to tomorrow's full board for the use of CMGC delivery as the ATM method on the US 17 404 Spur Bridge Maintenance Project.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes. Dennis?
Yeah, Andrew, what's your estimated cost for the project?
Right now it's very preliminary. Of course, we don't have a final design done at all, but I think in the 150 to 175 million range. Obviously, it's a lot more efficient than a total replacement of the bridge.
Yes, Mike, same question, Evie.
Same question. Any other questions? Yes. Kevin?
Andrew, I just want to clarify, are you saying that there's essentially three procurements, one for the consultant, one for the construction management phase, and then another procurement after pre-construction for the actual construction?
So, good question. So the way it's actually the CMGC manual aligns is we actually do a contract with the contractor, and then assuming they do become the general contractor, we actually just supplement that contract. So it goes from like a six-figure contract to, again, about a $150 million contract. So you don't have to do another procurement. You expand the contract, basically, is what you do.
So do they submit that estimate, that $150 million estimate as part of the initial RFP, RFQ phase?
No, because there's not really that much work to do at that point, not much work done. They submit their qualifications, and then you really work out the estimate, again, aligning with the independent cost estimate done. That's why that independent cost estimate is so important, and to be independent, because that's how you base your award approval on.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, Commissioner?
Let me go to the point, if you get to that point of when the CMGC or the contractor submits that, and we can't get to agreement, we do have the plan set that we could go out and separately procure it again in a different competitive environment.
Anything else? I think we need a vote. Yes, yes, sir, and I need a motion. Do you have a second? Mr. Brown? On the committee? Any other comments or questions? If not, then we need a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It carries. Thank you very much. Andrew, appreciate the report. We stand adjourned.
No. From Brian Robertson, Deputy HR Director. Brian?
I thought we had to wait this week.
Do we have, okay, Mr. Brian Robinson, are you in the room? I'm not forceful enough.
Yeah.
Mr. Robinson, thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chairman, members of the board, Commissioner. My name is Brian Robinson. I'm Deputy HR Director for GDOT. I'm here today to present HR updates on some of our key GDOT workforce initiatives. So for today's presentation, I'll be giving you an overview of the Office of Human Resources, discussing some workforce trends that we see impacting the department, talk a little bit about our approach to workforce planning, what we're doing to recruit, train, and maintain our staff, and finally conclude with some of the impacts of those efforts. So I realize the slide's kind of small here, but the purposes to kind of show the general structure of human resources within the department. Monica Ivey is our HR director, and as you can see, we're broken down into 3 distinct areas. On the left, you have really what are our strategic and policy areas. That's the areas that I oversee. They include things like our safety program, classification and compensation, recruitment, workforce planning, et cetera. In the center, you see our HR operations. That is Alicia Wyatt's area. That's what you think of as your day-to-day HR, your transactions, your benefits, your timekeeping. The third column is our talent development group. That's Kyle Moat's group. I know Kyle has previously presented to each of you on some of the efforts underway on employee development, so I will not be covering very much of his area today. And finally, you see a dotted line connection to our district HR group. So each of our districts has a dedicated HR team which provides services to that particular district. And as a whole, we work together to provide the HR services to our department. So last year when Monica presented, she highlighted some workforce trends that we were seeing. So today I just want to touch on some of those that are continuing that we see as impacting our workforce. One of those is we constantly see changes in employee and applicant expectations. We see a decrease in the average tenure, not only how long a person works for a particular company, but how long that person holds a particular position. That average time continues to decrease. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means from a training and development, from a knowledge management standpoint today. We also continue to see increased competition for qualified employees. And we still see organizations try to figure out how they're going to handle remote and hybrid work environments. I actually found an interesting article specific to the civil engineering workforce when we were preparing for the Transportation Summit that talked about civil engineers, how there were declining numbers of engineers at the exact time that we had an increased need, when you talk about the increased federal funding, et cetera. I want to talk about what that turnover and what that increase looks like for the department. So last year we had roughly 600 full-time employees to separate from GDOT. And this screen shows the reasons for those separations. As you can notice, roughly 90% of those, 88%, were voluntary separations. So those are your resignations, your retirements, your transfer to other agencies, and your presumptive resignations. So we continue to see high volume of voluntary turnover. When you talk about 600 people leaving an organization every year, not an engineer, but the quick math is you got to hire 600 people to backfill those just to keep even. That's not to increase headcount at all. You got to keep up with about 600. Ironically, 600 has been a pretty consistent number now for the past several years. It's been just above or just below that for some time. In fact, if there's any one slide I would ask you to remember as to why we're doing what we do, it's this slide. So the chart on the left shows an overview of the department's headcount as a trend, and as you can see, that trend goes down. You compare that to the chart on the right. That is a breakdown of our workforce by tenure. If you just focus on the blue bar is the percent of the department that has between 0 and 10 years of tenure. If you notice back in 2009, that was under 20% of our workforce had less than 10 years of tenure. You fast forward to today, 60% of our workforce has 10 years or less of tenure. You couple that with a lower head count, that means we have less people with less experience in many of our jobs, which makes the development and the training component very critical, as Kyle highlighted previously. So what are we doing about this? GDOT tries to address these challenges by engaging in strategic workforce planning. We rely on key partnerships for recruitment retention efforts. We work on innovative enhancements to our policies and our onboarding processes. And we continue to focus on employee engagement and talent development management to bridge that gap. So much like previous presentations talk about the planning that's required to do on various projects to get them successfully implemented, The same is said for our workforce. So why do we do strategic workforce planning? The big one is at the top, and that's to make sure that we're aligning our structure with our strategic goals, to make sure we have the right people in the right positions with the right skill sets to deliver our program. That also helps us to identify gaps where we can implement recruitment and retention challenges and strategies. Helps us to change for those changing or account for those changing workforce dynamics. Most importantly, we know we're going to have turnover, but we also know we have to have continuity of operations. So that allows us to build things in place to keep the business going despite that turnover, and also helps ensure that we're ready for the future of work. So I want to talk about this. Some of these were items that Monica Ivy presented as things we were working on last year when she presented. So one of the things that we recognize is really critical is when we do have a vacancy, is that we work to fill that position very quickly. So we have streamlined our selection panels along with the review and approval process. This was in partnership between HR, EEO, and our executive management group. We've also moved to virtual interviews as well as virtual hiring events, which I'll talk about some virtual hiring events shortly. Finally, we've recently implemented automatic vacancy notification to managers. So through our performance management process, we identified that one of the biggest times that a position remained vacant was from the time a person left until the time that we advertised that position. So our IT office reached out and said they thought they had a solution for that, and their solution was to create a process by as soon as a resignation or a retirement or a termination was entered in the system, that manager, the office head, and human resources immediately receives an email letting them know that that's happened, and it asks them, what do they want to do? Do you wish to fill it or not? So if they click yes, HR immediately turns around and reposts that position. So we took a process that was taking, in some cases, months to get a response back. In some cases now, it's a matter of hours before we're able to repost that vacancy once it becomes open. And finally, HR has recently repurposed 2 vacancies within our own office to fill what we see as 2 critical roles for our success. That was a telework coordinator position that we recently filled, as well as an onboarding and engagement coordinator to help improve that onboarding experience. So I want to highlight recruitment and retention efforts in 3 of our really critical areas. That's our equipment operators, our civil engineers, as well as our hero operators. So as many of you know, equipment operation makes up the bulk of our department. So any changes we make there to that workforce, we hope has some pretty major impacts. We recently moved to hiring all equipment operators as full-time employees, and we rebranded our entry-level position as a highway maintenance technician. This is much more in line with how we classify our other entry-level positions in the department. We also recently moved to increase those starting salaries from around $12.55 an hour up to $15 an hour to try to make them more attractive not only to external applicants, but also to help retain the existing employees that we have currently. HR has also partnered with our strategic communications office on ways that we can highlight and promote our career opportunities. We've also been utilizing Indeed.com. They have a virtual hiring platform, which I'll share with you in a few minutes, but that idea started with our HMTs. Yes, ma'am.
A quick question. You've gone from the $12.55 to the $15. Has that helped retention go into the $15 an hour?
It has. So it's helped with both retention and recruitment, and I'll actually show you the changes that has happened since we implemented that. But we have seen some positive impact there, but I'll say there's still a lot of work to do with that workforce in terms of recruitment and retention, but this has certainly helped. When you couple the salary increase with the full-time permanent position that we filled them as, it's a much more attractive position now. Our hero operators are another group where we're trying to find innovative ways to not only find but keep employees. So we have also been trying to utilize various recruitment efforts there, from in-person hiring events to virtual hiring events. This is a screenshot from our webpage that we've worked with Strategic Communications to create. As you can see, employees are able to go through, or applicants are able to go through and research and find information on our jobs, which includes our hero operators. I want to talk briefly about a change that we've been utilizing, and that was utilizing virtual hiring events. So typically, for our equipment operators, for our hero operators, et cetera, we would advertise a job, we'd get a list of applicants, we'd schedule interviews and conduct interviews. By using Indeed.com, it's a giant employment board. We're able to set dates and pre-establish times. Applicants actually go out and schedule their own interviews in available time slots. So what we do is we have multiple HR employees and multiple subject matter experts available on a given day. So in some cases, we're able to interview up to 80 to 90 applicants in one day for positions where we used to only interview up to a dozen. So I want to talk again about another area that's critical to the department, and that is our civil engineers. So our recruitment activities really take two different approaches, and those are activities designed to fill immediate vacancies, as well as activities designed to build and improve upon our pipeline of applicants in the future. If you remember, I talked about an ASCE article, and it talked about the challenge of making sure we have enough students who are interested in pursuing STEM and civil career fields in the future to make sure we have that pipeline in place. So some of those examples include return to in-person and on-campus events. Many of those had stopped because of COVID, but we have returned to those campuses. Enhanced utilization of online platforms and social media, as well as efforts to engage with school-age children in STEM careers. So this list is a list of the various events that we attended last semester. You can see it's over 35 events, including the various schools represented here. One thing I do want to say, this doesn't just apply to civils, but it's not mentioned here. I know this does come up. We are currently, if you have constituents who are interested, our summer internship is currently advertised. So we advertise our internship programs at all of these schools, but I know often, many times you have employees or have constituents who are interested in internships for their students. That is currently open, and we'll be happy to provide any information that you wish to have on our internship program. So in addition to the traditional career fairs, one of the innovative things we've been doing is trying to find ways to get on campuses to have direct connection with students. As you know, career fairs, there's dozens and dozens of employers, and it's kind of easy to get caught up in the mix there. So we've been attending a lot of various events, whether it's Employer of the Days, campus takeovers, guest speaker series. This allows our engineers to have one-on-one contact directly with those students. And in fact, next week, GDOT is featured as the employer on campus at UGA. We actually have engineers who will be guest speakers in 6 different classes on UGA's campus next week. So really cool opportunity to get in front of students, not only talk about civil engineering, doesn't hurt also get to talk a little bit about what they do at GDOT and why we hope they would come to join us in the future. So these are some actual pictures from what those events look like. Top left picture is actually Commissioner McMurray speaking at University of Georgia at a campus takeover we had during the Transportation Summit. So you can kind of see how you really get a unique opportunity to get up in front of a classroom, talk one-on-one with students about what it is we do for the department. You'll see a variety of pictures here of various engineers and HR professionals at these types of career events. We found that these really help us make a more direct connection with our students, which in some cases, as you see a picture here bottom left, those were 2 students who we built relationships with over the years who ultimately came and started with the department. So we think this is really a novel and unique way to get in front of students on campuses, and something that we look to enhance and continue with the rest of this year. Obviously, that's a lot of work to convince someone to come here. It takes just as much work to keep them here. So for our engineers, we really try to focus on the career development opportunities that they have here with us. We highlight the fact that most often these are young college graduates. It's their first job out of school. They don't always know exactly what they want to do in the engineering field. So one thing we like to highlight is they have the opportunity to experience multiple engineering fields at one organization. They don't have to leave us if they got hired in construction and find construction isn't for them. They can go to design, they can go to utilities, they can go to traffic operations. So we think that is not only a great selling point, but a great retention point as well. One really cool event that we did twice last year was we hosted focus groups with all of the civil engineers that we had hired since 2020. And we asked them, what made you choose GDOT? Or what could we have done differently to maybe convince other students to come to GDOT? And a lot of it had to do with the relationships that got built. And some of the feedback was they wish they had heard about us earlier in their career, that some of them didn't hear about us until their junior or senior year when they already had internships and were already making those decisions. So again, that is part of why we have a concerted effort to get onto those campuses to get our name out earlier. Again, this was just a very brief slide as to some of the things that Kyle had touched on previously. When you talk about having a smaller workforce with less experience, training and development and knowledge transfer becomes very important. So we have a very robust talent development program that not only tries to make employees successful in their current job, but also helps prepare them for future roles to take on. One of our biggest area of focus has been frontline supervisors. We see that as one of the most critical groups in the department with helping to retain employees. So this is the last slide, and it kind of shows the results of some of those efforts. The red line represents the start of the fiscal year when many of those changes went into place. So as you can see, since July 1st, I know each month the commissioner gets in front of you and he talks about the employment figures, how many people left, how many people were promoted, how many people were hired. We've actually seen an increase in our full-time headcount of about 140 since the start of the fiscal year. Again, when you talk about losing 600 people every year, that's a long road to come back from. If you recall, that trend had been dropping for a number of years, so we have quite a bit of ground to make up. In fact, our goal is to try to get back to around 4,000 full-time employees. And we really see this only being accomplished by focusing not just on hiring, but trying to retain more of our employees. The thought being the fewer people that leave, that's the fewer people you have to replace. So again, we know there's a lot of work to do to build back our workforce, but we think we have a great team in place to do it. We think we have the processes in place that are streamlined and efficient. We have great partnerships in the department, again, with our executive management team, our hiring managers, subject matter experts, as well as groups like EEO, IT, and communications. So with that, I'll be happy to take any questions or comments that you guys may have about our workforce efforts.
Thank you, Brian.
Brian, when it comes to your ability to increase salaries, are you limited to what is in the governor's budget for state employees?
Yes, so obviously there's a big partnership with our budget office. So typically when we look at salaries, we don't look at it for unique individuals. We try to look at what should the salary be for our civil engineering group. But yes, it is budget constrained. Yes, sir.
Which is out of your control?
Yes, sir. We have a budget process where we're able to try to work to do that, but we do have a budget we have to maintain there. Yes.
Help you out there, Brian. Absolutely, Mr. McIntyre. It's our budgets, as Angela just presented, are by budget program, and so we have to operate within the budgetary constraint of those programs. As you remember, or may remember, in the 23 budget, the base budget, there was Angela mentioned the $5,000 salary increase, which just elevated everybody that was here. That doesn't help with base salaries of people that are being recruited. And then we did have a line item for recruitment and retention with some money for that, which we're trying to work toward deploying those dollars. Again, to Brian's point, it's a lot easier. If you don't have to recruit as hard because you've got better retention, we're all better off. So we're trying to work toward that, but there's budgetary constraint. There's also constraint among common job titles among state agencies. Accountants, auditors, things that would be common across other agencies do have, the salaries are statewide salaries at that point. So you lose some of your flexibility in trying to elevate salaries because they're common job titles across the entire state, every agency in the state.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions? I have a question, Brian. The job market just holistically is cyclical, in terms of economic cycles. How long has approximately this cycle that we're dealing with right now, in terms of, it's an employees market, how long has that been going on for, and do we anticipate that, the cycle will change sometime in the next few years?
Man, if I had that answer.
Well, how about the first part? How long has it
So
been?
it's very interesting because one of the items I took off was back in 2021 there was a concept called the Great Resignation, and it kind of coincided with COVID, where a lot of people were quitting their jobs and moving, and people thought that was going to be sort of the term of that year. Well, it's really continued. Those trends continue. So it goes back at least 2 to 3 years where we see the really high levels of voluntary turnover. That is employees in the marketplace choosing to leave jobs, not because they were laid off, but because they chose to leave for other employers. So it's been in place currently at least since COVID started, if not slightly before.
Okay. I got a second unrelated question. With respect to our consultant community, I suspect that their contracts with us have non-hire clauses, but yet I know there's a pipeline from GDOT to the consultant community over the course of many years. How does that kind of impact all this? And
so we don't, to my knowledge, Matt, we don't really
there
have
are no
any,
okay.
we don't really have any of those types of clauses. The only situation you run into are conflict of interest situations where you participated in the procurement of that consultant or that contractor for a specific activity. You can't then turn right back around and now join that company working on that same specific situation. But beyond that, we do not have any clauses that prevent our employees from then joining the consultant workforce after leaving here, unless, again, there's a conflict of interest.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Thank you very much, Brian, for that really interesting presentation, and I'll call the Committee of the Whole meeting adjourned. Thank you.